everybody. Welcome to another episode of the NerdBrand podcast. So, hello, I'm Jason Davis. That's Mitch, and that's John.
Maybe.
Some days. So,
depending on your screen layout.
Depending on your screen layout, that's true. But I think it records mine, so it might be actually very accurate. This episode we're talking about the elements of storytelling, plot, and character. And if you're thinking like, what's that got to do with business? Keep listening. All right. So we're going to start off this podcast with some interesting news that's Mitch's fault. And we may call this little segment just off the wall. I don't know. It's sound effects on video are not as impressive as they are on audio that way, because now you can see me and what I'm doing. So anyways, Mitch, tell us what Salesforce has been up to.
Well, I happened to see a story today as I'm perusing through the morning news. Salesforce, which of course is a developer of CRMs and all things CRM, developed an algorithm that apparently can help detect breast cancer with some pretty amazing accuracy. And the question in my mind was, how did we get from point A to point B?
How's
but
work?
Essentially, it breaks down this way. And I'm quoting from an article that was from venturebeat.com that says, quote, Salesforce researchers developed an algorithm called ReceptorNet that can predict hormone receptor status from inexpensive and ubiquitous images of tissue, basically meaning that these are images that they can obtain fairly cheaply and inexpensively without a lot of, expensive medical procedures and things. And it basically can detect, this algorithm can detect the cancer cells with 92% accuracy.
Well, that's the first time I've heard a CRM actually get involved in diagnosis and cancer research. And
Is it just PR?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But that's an off the wall thing. So thank you, Mitch.
Things that you just happen onto when you're perusing the headlines.
Yeah. We also want to mention too that they bought Slack for an ungodly amount of money, like billion, not million, billion.
27 billion, 28.
Yeah, it's like, are they taking their cues from Disney when acquisitions or something? Because that's just crazy.
I didn't really get it. I don't know. I haven't read any commentary or real judgment of it, but it doesn't, other than just like sheer exposure or the ability to tap into an audience, I don't get it.
Well, I mean,
Slack is more than a messenger system. I mean, the APIs that it can connect to manage project management, communication, email. You can send email from Slack. There's all kinds of slash commands that you can even create if you want. You can do a lot of AI development yourself, which I shouldn't say it that way because that's not really probably totally accurate, but you can create bots and stuff. But mostly it's also good for networking. Like you get into certain Slack groups, like Laura and I were in the one for WordPress. So when there's a new development and release of WordPress, we're seeing conversations about it, which is a good way to kind of get ahead of any vulnerabilities that may come out in WordPress. Even though we have a really reliable hosting partner, we don't need to really worry about that. But it's really kind of nice to kind of see like a new function and you can be involved in those conversations and join in. And so it's a good way to network online. Another channel, I guess you could say, if you're looking for opportunities for work. But it takes a while to cultivate any channel. Like it's taken me 2 years for LinkedIn to start actually, clicking,
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. I mean, I see the value of Salesforce and I see the value of Slack.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Again, I haven't read much about it, but I don't get what Salesforce for $28 billion, what they're really shooting for. Because
I want to make a Slack group that's for networking that we run that, is for businesses to come in and we all chat for that week or that day about a topic or something, and it's just kind of, policies though. The thing is, it's like how to figure out like how to monitor that and make sure dumb crap doesn't happen. That would require payment, to Slack, because Slack is free for the most part. There's a lot of things you can't do for free. Like there's only so many messages, so many attachments, so many things you can do before you have to start paying for the account. So the group would have to, donate and contribute to a fund in order for us to be able to pay for it, because that's not going to come out of my pocket. But it's kind of a neat idea. I thought about it.
There's a lot of private membership Slacks that, I mean, they're paid groups and you get access, and, they're well moderated and all that. But I've been in a few here and there. I know one that I was pretty active in for like a year or two was Buffers. They've got a Buffer community Slack that all of their users, and of course most of those people are marketers and things like that. So it was helpful. It was useful. And they had probably 10 or 12 moderators and people leading different discussions and things like that. So it's cool.
Yeah. And it's also National Write a Business Plan Month for those out there that didn't know that. So perfect.
What's that?
All right. Shameless plug for nothing that really we have nothing to do with, but it is actually that. But it kind of gives us a nice segue into, our show here, because elements of storytelling. But before that, I do want to kind of follow up from last week's show. If you're tuning in, you can go back and listen to last week's show, which was on brand evolution and pivoting and what that looks like. And we kind of used the movie industry and online streaming as an example of how they're pivoting right now. And things keep releasing, because in that show, we said DC was moving all of their films, still keeping them in the theaters, but they're moving all their releases to HBO Max. Because we all knew Wonder Woman was going to go there anyway. But they did it for the entire slate for 2021. As soon as we got done with the show, John sends me an email and says, I think it was you, John. It was like, hey, it's all of Warner Brothers too.
Oh, yeah.
So all of Warner Brothers is doing, so it's both. And then this morning, Mitch, you found something. You want to share that?
Well, yeah, there was some big news last night in Disney's investor. I guess their investor call. There's going to be a total of 22 Marvel and Star Wars related properties that will be released via Disney Plus.
Wow.
Everybody already knew about, everybody kind of knew all the talk and buzz about all the Marvel shows that were coming, WandaVision, the Loki series, an animated What If show. And there's also a Samuel L. Jackson is involved with some form of Nick Fury show. But there's also going to be a whole slew. I think there were like 10 Star Wars related shows that are going to be released to Disney Plus.
We're going to see Luke Skywalker on Mandalorian. I'm pretty convinced that's going to happen. There was talk that the actor that plays Bucky in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the recast for Luke Skywalker, because they look a lot alike if you put them next to each other. But anyway, yeah, I guess the streaming wars are in full force now, because I don't know. There's a lot of debate about whether or not if this is. It's hard to make I can't remember his name, but Blum from Blumhouse. They kind of make horror movies. He was like, for $150 million, it's really hard to justify making a movie for Netflix on that budget. He says it's just not financially feasible. And one of the things that I read after John sent me his email was Warner, when DC did that, it was like kind of expected. But when Warner Brothers did that, there's other sub studios involved. And Legendary is a huge studio that produces these movies. And if you don't know what Legendary is, it's kind of the funky logo you'll see come up. And if you watched any Christopher Nolan film,
it's kind of a cross shape, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like Celtic or something.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I should know that. I'm Irish, but but anyway, they were mad, and Nolan was tweeting flat out. He's pissed because they had two movies. One was a $175 million budget. One was $160 million. They had a deal on the table for those two movies to go to Netflix to be distributed for $250 million. But because Warner Brothers did this deal with HBO Max without telling Legendary, blew it up. Not going to happen.
Studio's going to studio.
Yeah, so there's all of that going on. So there's this. It's not just Warner Brothers. It's not just Sony. It's not just Disney. There's all these others that are involved, and these calls that are being made to just send it over to streaming are kind of being done with a broad brush. And so it's going to be a very interesting year. I see some litigations happening, and it's things like that. So anyway,
To me, what was interesting about the Disney Plus thing is, all the, and what caught everybody by surprise was all the Star Wars shows, not the Marvel shows, because everybody kind of had an idea those were coming.
yeah.
But it seems like there's been discussion over the last few years about, maybe how the studio has been watering down the Star Wars property by releasing. We talked about this, I think, maybe last week.
Yeah, we did.
Releasing all this stuff and just kind of saturating the market with Star Wars.
Yeah.
Then they turn around and they're going to throw out 10. Look at the run. Here's the rundown of the series: Obi-Wan Kenobi, Rangers of the New Republic. Is it Ahsoka?
Well, that one I can see happening with the success that, her appearance on Mandalorian just
right. Well, then you got the Mandalorian. Then one called Lando, of course, about who. Yeah. One called the Acolyte, and then Star Wars: The Bad Batch, whatever that's going to be.
Okay.
Star Wars Visions, which is going to be an anthology series, and A Droid Story, which is supposed to be an animated series with R2-D2 and C-3PO. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of Star Wars.
Is it over 10 years? I can't remember. I thought I saw that.
I have to go back and look at the article, but
I feel like the tweet said over the next decade or something.
This is an article from Variety, and it Disney announced Thursday that Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios will be delivering at least 20. This is cumulatively at least 22 series to the streaming service starting in 2021. Executive Chairman Bob Iger suggested a time horizon stretching to 2023. So less than, we're talking 2 years essentially. It's a lot of content.
Yeah, that is.
Is there an appetite?
Well, time will tell. As vaccines rolling out, and 3 months from now, we could be on a even more positive side of this pandemic, maybe through it possibly at that point. Time will tell. But in case you couldn't tell on this podcast, we love movies and all things nerd, because we believe it's the culture of the day. Because nothing is coincidence in advertising with film and video games and everything. It's not a coincidence that it's like it is. So, when you look at like things that we do, we look at we talk about the nerd stuff because honestly, you're seeing the advertising for that. It's about getting consumers, it's about customers. And now you have the model now with everything going streaming, it's about subscriptions. It's sort of like very much like the Costco model, where Costco is really not a competitor, if you would, of Kroger or whatever. They're more of a subscription-based type thing. So they're more akin to Netflix than they are to anything else, like another grocer.
It's a club.
Yeah, it's a club. So, but anyways, in this episode, we're discussing elements of storytelling, starting with the why to tell it to begin with. And then you have your characters. And then how does all this relate to the business? Well, here we go. The first one we're going to talk about in the elements of storytelling is plot, which, Star Wars, they have multiple ones going on, and I think maybe at some point we'll see them all converge. I'm sure, eventually, if they're smart, they'll probably do a Marvel thing where all these shows will start to converge, and you'll see like familiar characters like Chewbacca, and who knows, because apparently that universe is in Mandalorian is happening after Return of the Jedi. So, but the plot is your why for doing what you do. So, you guys have any stories that you remember that either were awesome, had a great plot, or just totally failed? And do you have any that you recall? John, I know you're not a big movie goer, so you're probably not, but I know you something where you're just like, well, that missed the mark.
I'm thinking.
I've seen so many. I'm a movie hound. Old stuff, new stuff. I just like film. I'm trying to think of one that really fell flat. One that stands out in my mind, this is digging way back in the 80s. Me and some friends went to see Hercules with Lou Ferrigno. If anybody remembers who Lou Ferrigno is, he played the Hulk on the original TV series in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was an Italian made production, so all the voices were dubbed. Even if you could watch their lips and tell they were probably speaking English, you could tell it was dubbed. And especially Lou Ferrigno's, because Lou had a hearing loss as a child, so it's kind of reflected a bit in his voice. But when his voice comes out like this, and it's like, no, that's not what Lou Ferrigno sounds like at all. Anyway, but it was so patently, and I'm into sci-fi and comic books and nerd stuff. I've got a pretty wide, availability for suspending disbelief.
We don't believe that because all that Batman stuff behind.
I mean, it was just bad. There's just no other way to. I mean, they took all the labors of Hercules, of course, tying them into a single plot thread, but it just instead just seemed like all these different set pieces loosely attached to one another with really cheesy special effects.
Yeah, that can be distracting from the plot, but to kind of help out as y'all
What
bring.
plot?
Yeah. The plot defines what the story is about and what the audience will experience. So it sets up your motivations and challenges and the goals, the role that people are going to take to fulfill it. It helps the audience empathize with the protagonist. And so how does this relate to business? Well, in relationship to the plot and how that helps the audience empathize with the protagonist, that's you, the business owner. That's you, the one that owns the brand. And so the plot is directly tied to why you're doing what you're doing in our mission and in our philosophy when we talk to people about, trying to understand, like, you can't just market somebody anymore. You can't just brand somebody or make a website or you can't just do anything, even though Nike's just do it still pretty valid, but there's got to be a strategy and a reason and purpose behind it. Otherwise it just doesn't make sense when you get to the end of it and you get a weird Lou Ferrigno voiceover.
I mean, it has, it had
Happens all the time.
your brand's plot has to be a reflection of who you are and what you're about. It's the vehicle that tells that story, but it expresses that thought, that feeling, that those principles of why you exist. And like with the Lou Ferrigno, the Hercules thing, if it's just kind of a thrown together just for a wow effect, without any kind of trying to make a lasting impression, it's going to pass away very quickly without any notice.
Yeah, all spectacle, no meaning.
Exactly.
Which in this series, we'll get to spectacle because you do have to have that, but
it has a place.
It has a place, but it's not the thing. I did list show notes. Oh, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, from a business perspective, I think people get so ingrained in their day to day and in their business as a whole, and they've been doing it. We talk about it all the time. They've been doing it for 15 years, 10 years, 20 years, and you don't feel like your plot, whatever, you don't feel like you have a story, or you feel like it's boring because you're in it day to day and you're so focused on, you're just in this mindset where you've been beat down and you had to push on and on. For a small business owner, it's, fighting through a pandemic. Like, you can't think about your story while you're trying to keep payroll going.
But which in a way, it's just as important,
right,
in that crisis environment, and maybe even more so,
right,
than it is during normal times.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge for a lot of business owners, especially on that side, but even brand managers and things like that at the higher level. And I think that's a big value of obviously bringing in, I don't like to call ourselves consultants either, but that is what we are. It's valuable to bring those people in so that they can kind of take that third person, outside objective view and say, this is your story, this is what's going on, or this is how we can tell it a little bit better, while you focus on the stuff that you do have to focus on.
I've struggled for years with places that they kind of get very myopic about what's going on, and we got to do this, close this deal, get this done. But I'm like, there's another quarter coming. The clock's not going to stop for you. Time is an enemy. So in 3 months, if it's January, you should be thinking about second quarter or even the third. You should be really looking forward, looking out. And as a brand manager, marketing manager, you should be thinking about what you're going to do, because you may have a good month or good quarter in sales now, but the next one may be crap. Like I think in 2020, first quarter was okay. Second was, I think we all know that. Third was shaky. Fourth, we don't have the numbers yet for, but it's been a the proof in the pudding type of thing with this explanation we're giving in this year alone, and the lack of planning and what the consequences of that are, and they're pretty severe by not doing it. There's I had a list of movies that have been forgettable in 2020, like Bad Boys for Life. I actually watched that, don't remember anything about it. Birds of Prey. I like Margot Robbie, but I skipped it because I was just like, I saw the animated feature. I'm good. I've even got a comic of it. Fantasy Island, I thought was a very interesting movie. I didn't watch it again because I watched the review and it's like, that sounds boring. So,
Really?
plot's very important. I mean, it's just very
Well,
important.
well, when you take a property and you sort of monkey with the original premise to what made it successful, and this happens with products, it happens with brands, and you take something that worked and put a twist on it to make it stand apart. Sometimes you lose what made it that thing attractive in the first place, and I think that's kind of what happened with Fantasy Island, because it went, from what I understand, it went really dark.
Yeah, but it kind of got corny a little bit, I think. I mean, it didn't really go like, if you're going to be a horror movie, be a horror movie. If you're going to be a comedy, be a comedy. And I think that when you think about a plot, one of the things we talk about a lot in the agency is having a content anchor. It provides focus, but it also allows your audience to know you for that. And then as you go, you can add other things. Like right now, this is our content anchor. We'll add on a newsletter, we'll add on other things as we go. But until you kind of get that one down and people kind of get to know you for it and enjoy it and like to hear that from you, it's really hard to just bolt on another thing and another thing and another thing. Like our social media, you look at our social media, and John, you can explain why it's this way, but it's not like stuff, because we know people don't engage with that anymore. They engage with us. So, and that's what this is, and this works much better for that. Um, but so for branding, like to break down the plot for those listening. So for branding and design, the plot helps our team kind of get a clear perspective and headspace on what we're going to focus on, so that we can actually overcome impending challenges your business has. It sets the purpose for your users to look and make a decision, which is why you have to kind of land on a content anchor and kind of really come up with a good solid strategy that you're going to stick with for a year, uh, and then see how it goes, measure that, evolve it, or if you have to, switch. But that's what's in my headspace. John, you got an opinion on that?
I think we talk, like you mentioned, it's the why of what you're doing, and that's something that we talk about all the time. If you don't have a why, if you don't kind of clearly express that outwardly into your customers, get them to believe in it, get them to express it to other people, then you don't have in this context, you don't have a plot for your business, and you've seen a movie without a plot. So what do you think happens to a business without a plot?
Yeah.
It's I think we're kind of stating the obvious. If you don't have a reason for existing, people don't have anything to latch on to. They don't have anything to convey to their friends and family. What's that?
You don't have anything to remember you for.
Right.
Well, and
I see what you're doing there.
the whole idea of having an anchor, especially in social media, that people can connect with, is because of social media, I think people are used to attaching to what they at least believe is a real person.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we all know with these big brands, I mean, it's a team of people that are putting out content and speaking to the audience at large, but people want to feel like they have that personal connection with an individual, a brand as a person, a persona.
Yeah, that's
you want that. And to your point, it's got to be consistent on a regular basis, and it has to have value to what that audience wants, desires, believes. And like you say, it takes time. All these things don't happen just because social media happens. Doesn't mean that linkage with an audience and growing an audience happens that way. It takes time, but if you do it right, I mean, all the tools are there now. All the recipes are there now. You just have to have a partner who can help you develop that recipe, develop a plan, help you cultivate that plot and execute it in a consistent way.
That's the change that's coming next year for a lot of business owners that are struggling. I think that you've had a website, you've had an ad campaign, you paid for this, you paid for all these things with your agency. Even if you had a strategy, the one key thing that has to be at the center of it now that business owners aren't used to, and we touched on this in the last podcast, was pivoting, and the fact that you yourself have to now start to connect with your customers more personally, because it's been up to this point a faceless entity. And sometimes that can work fine. You know what I mean? E-commerce, I think, kind of shows that eventually people kind of trust the brand. But in small business, it's always going to be like that personal connection is going to be that first thing. Like, people know me, people know Mitch, people are getting to know John and Mitch and other people in NerdBrand. But it all started with me and Mitch. And it's still, people still ask, how's Mitch? People still want to know, like, is he busy? You know, how's he doing? Because he's not been as visible as I am. But
yesterday, a prospect thought you were my boss, Mitch.
Wait, what?
I was like, whatever.
Boy, I'm dying to know who that was.
Yeah,
I'll tell you later.
Boy, they got that backwards.
Yeah, just so everybody knows the architecture here. John and I are partners. We're all co-founders, but Mitch works for us. So, but yeah, we'll have our titles.
Happily.
We'll have I'll have Alex add that and edit. But anyway,
you're my creative boss. You are my boss in the creative direction.
There's no bosses here. There's no bosses here. We're a team. We're a team. Yeah. We're brothers. We're like three dysfunctional brothers. Well, not that dysfunctional.
I'm an only child, and I've enjoyed that for years. So speak for yourself.
It shows.
We're pretty functional.
We are.
Oh man. So anyway,
steer it back.
Character. That's the next piece we're going into. This show is elements of storytelling, plot. Now we're going to talk about character. Stay tuned for future shows. Go to nerdbrandagency.com/what, John?
Podcast.
See, it's really simple. We like to make it simple. I
almost
forgot. Reaching your customers, that's your users. So characters, customers, that's your users of your website, people that come in the door, buy your product, you know. So without characters well defined, the audience cannot believe what they're being told. Traits, the characters must be related to them. You can tell I'm reading this because this helps see justification behind the character's actions. It builds trust. So here's a great example. I put it in the show notes, so I'm not veering off into weird territory where you guys are like, God, I can, because I do that all the time to these guys.
Hold on, folks.
Every time I veer and pivot, they're like, that's not in the show notes, Jason. God.
I know the question earlier wasn't in there, and I'm like, no, I don't know any movie plots.
I like you guys on your feet. See how well you tap dance. So anyways, and I know you haven't seen this movie, John, even though it's in the show notes, but if you do watch this movie, maybe watch it like, I don't know, when you guys aren't running around trying to diaper a newborn that's coming. But the movie, The Joker, and I know, Mitch, you've probably seen it.
No, I want to. I really want to. The problem
free as I can make it for you guys.
the problem is, since we're all cloistered at home with our families, is trying to find I don't like to watch movies generally by myself. To me, watching a film with other people makes it more enjoyable. And I can't find anybody in the house that wants to watch The Joker with me. So I'm going to have to buckle down and watch it by myself.
Yeah, I don't have that problem. I've gone to the movie theater by myself. I've gone out to eat by myself, and I tell people that, and they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, "I can do that."
Gotta eat.
Yeah, like, bugging me.
Eating's one thing, but to me, watching movies is very much I enjoy it as a communal experience, and I don't generally love watching a movie by myself. I will, but
Well, the Joker, this movie did this really well, in the point we're making here. So, for those that don't know, the Joker is obviously a killer. There was a comic that was released, The Dark Knight Rises, and he was interviewed on a television show inside this trade that Frank Miller did, and they disclosed that this is a guy that's totally reformed and killed over 600 people. That was the number they put in there, which I thought was interesting. And so, but in the movie, you're watching this character, but the character is so well developed that you begin to empathize with him as he goes through hazing and bullying. And there's a lot of it in the movie that people are debating, did it really happen? And I think that the hazing and the bullying did in the movie, because the movie does this mind trick where it's like you're not certain if he's hallucinating or if he's having, because he's mentally, with problems, right? It's a Joker.
He has issues.
He has some issues. So the point is, though, that you start to look at that, and I think we've all been bullied at one point, made fun of, hazed, or something in our life, and you start to look at that and you start to empathize. So they did a really good job with the character in the movie of creating that trust and connection. When Mitch talks about linkage, that's kind of what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, like, got to be some connection to this, to that, to this, that all goes back to you. So I think the Joker did a really good job of that. So characters are your users, and without them in the center of your design process, there's really no reasons or problems to justify their need to spend time learning and buying from you, is the point. And so we try to facilitate that by doing research, doing a strategy. There's just so much that we add on, and it's all on the front end of the process. I think over the years, a lot of agencies and places have sold the back of the process to kind of convert a sale, but we've backed up all the way to the front and taken that financial risk and hit to do it right, so that when we get to the end of the process, there's a better result. And I think we've proven that. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I think we do a lot of it before before we have an agreement signed, because we do a lot of discovery on the front side. We do a lot of kind of strategy, and I think you have to, if you really want results, if you want to have a good handle on the project on both sides, if you want the client to understand what they're getting and why they're getting it that way, you have to do that, 3 weeks of discovery on the front side and talk to them and say, really clearly identify the problem and figure out what questions to ask, because if you're asking the wrong questions, you're going to get the wrong outcome. So yeah, I mean, I do think that that's kind of a unique approach. I won't say that we're the only people who do it, but I think it's a rarity in our specific industry.
I mean, I think as a brand is the character. The brand is the central. Well, there's exceptions.
There's a whole
But-
cat.
No, there is, but the lead character is. It can be either one of two things. It can be the customer, because if you're trying to reflect back to them, did you understand who they are? You understand their needs. You understand what they're looking for, what they want and desire. But it can also be the brand itself. So you've kind of got the two primary characters in marketing are the brand itself and the customer. The customer wants to see themselves reflected, and they want to be able to emotionally connect and trust you as a brand.
Yeah, there's several things that could be a character in a film. Okay, if you watch the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and you're looking at all these characters that are in it, you got Rocket Raccoon, you've got Groot, you've got Star-Lord. I mean, you've got all these characters, right? The one character that doesn't actually gets credit is the music. The music is a character, because the music is setting the tone for every single act that happens. And even that, because it's like the tape deck, it's like the best, I forget what it's called, volume, but it's Best Hits Volume 1.
Volume 1, and then there's Volume 2.
Yeah, and Volume 2 happens in the sequel. So that's a character, so anything is like that. So that would be akin as an example of when talking about a brand being a character, because you have something that's inanimate. It's not a person, it's a character.
Yeah. I think that's, I'm not a movie buff, but that's probably one of the first things I pay attention to in a movie, or one of the things that impresses me the most. You like a scary film or horror movie, especially the old ones, without the music, it's not scary. It's kind of incredible, like how the audio portion of a film or anything, how much it sets the tone for the film. I mean, if you put Three Stooges music to Jason, it might start to be a little humorous. So it's kind of wild how, and maybe we should do that.
I'm all for it.
But even things like that, like my 2-year-old's been watching Cars, the series Cars, and the music adds so much depth to that movie. I've unfortunately had to watch it about 700 times in the last 3 weeks. But so I've really like started to pay attention to it and pay attention to the details. And there's so much like background music and like orchestral type stuff that sets the tone. Even being a kids movie, it impacts the whole kind of aura of the film.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's other aspects. I mean, talking about inanimate objects. Going back to Star Wars again, the Death Star is a character.
Yeah. I mean,
The Millennium Falcon.
It's funny you just mentioned
is a character.
That. I was watching a documentary on when they were exploring Saturn. They put that probe out there, and I can't remember the name of it. But anyways, there's a moon around Saturn that looks like the Death Star. It's got this giant impact crater, and it's got a ridge around.
That's no moon.
Yeah, that's no moon. So yeah, it's funny you say that, because as soon as I saw that, my brain triggered, and anymore because copyright slapped me. But essentially, that's what happened when I watched that. I mean, there's things that, sound is such a important medium in anything you do within your brand, within those branding, because later it will trigger. You'll remember that. You'll recall it, and your brand, you want it to be memorable. See what I'm doing? See what I'm doing, guys? See?
Well, think about this, and this is a legacy brand.
Yeah, it is. They do have that.
Coke. The Coke bottle
mm-hmm.
is a character. The Coke logo is a character.
Yeah,
there's different brands. Yeah, I mean, you think of the bottle, people buy it. Well, they'll look at a shelf and pick a bourbon or a whiskey based on the bottle.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the story that you build behind that, behind that label, behind that bottle. A bourbon that comes to mind right now that I think is doing pretty well, but it's Larceny. And I mean, it's been a couple years, but I bought a bottle of it. It was, for number one, it was new, and I was still in that kind of investigative area, learning about bourbon. But you hear a brand called Larceny, and you hear a brand called Larceny, and there's a story. It implies a story.
Yeah,
it just implies a story.
Everything we operate on I don't hide it, the golden circle. So our why, our how, and then our what. Obviously the what is the services we provide and the things we produce, but in the how is everything is an ad. That's what we believe. We believe everything is an ad. So whether if it's that, like we're talking here in these examples, the music, the bottles, all that. I mean, that's advertising. That's putting something out there. So thinking about that before you just throw it out there. There's been years of just throwing things out there, and we like to take more time with it than that, which kind of throws people off, I think, a little.
Because every little piece is telling this has a role in telling the story. So you need to make sure that thing is behaving in such a way and is created in such a way that it carries that story well and consistently.
Yeah. Doing ads is one thing, but the success of those ads, it depends on the message on the ad, the call to action, where it takes the user after they click the ad, and what it says there is very important, and a lot of times I've seen brands just kind of slap up an ad, and then it takes them to a regular web page, not an actual landing page. And there's all kinds of distractions. And it's like, you have an ad for dog food and you send it to a page that's got dog food and cat food on it. You should have just sent them to a landing page just about dog food and gourmet dog food. It's going to be that, and it should be that specific, just not dog food, because I can walk down a grocery aisle and see dog food. But if you're targeting gourmet, you want to do that. Or if it's for special breeds, then that's your advertising campaign. It's just that, not this broad thing.
I mean, one of the best elements of good storytelling is staying on message, staying on tone, and bringing people into a certain mind space and keeping them in that space.
Yeah.
You don't want to take that. It's like, to your point, if you develop an ad and they click on the ad and it takes them to your general homepage and then leaves them there to wander, you've taken them out of the moment. Keep them in the moment. Keep them in that same headspace.
Yep. And movies have done that. I've seen a couple of movies recently because we're all quarantined and at home. It totally takes you out of the moment, things that happen, the cuts. One of the things for our listeners, for the nerd side of things, just go look up Star Wars, the George Lucas cut, the very first one with A New Hope, watch his cut. And then there's a documentary, I think, on YouTube you can watch for free on this, but then watch the one that his wife did. And the night and day difference between her cut, because her cut was the theatrical release. His cut really didn't get daylight ever, I don't think. It may have later. There's been like 4 or 5 George Lucas cuts, of that thing later that came out on Blu-ray. But that movie, she saved it. She really did. How she edited that film and cut it together was brilliant because it kept you in the moment. And his cut, there was scene to scene to scene. It would take you out of the moment, because you're just kind of like pulled and yanked around and you're kind of like, wait a minute. I want to know what happened to that. It's kind of like, honestly, to be funny, it's kind of like eavesdropping on people talking on their phone. Your sister did what? And then they walk away and you're like, I want to know what the sister did. And then you chase them out the parking lot. Hey, who has the rash? You're just kind of left hanging. You don't have any, you're not closure, people. That's what we're talking about.
Keep them in the loop. Keep them in the moment. Keep them in that headspace.
Yeah.
If you take a customer, if you take a prospect somewhere, you've successfully created an interaction, and then just dump them off someplace, hoping that they're going to do what you need them to do, left to their own devices in an environment like a homepage that's full of, choices to make.
Don't make me think.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's a natural organic flow that you want to follow in good storytelling that follows through in good marketing, good advertising.
Yeah.
Go that way.
Yeah. I don't want a fork in the road that's got like 10 different splits. I don't even want 2. Just one. Just the one. But that's going to be pretty much for this episode about plot and character and how that relates to your brand and how storytelling actually works in branding, and how it's so important to kind of get that fixed on the outset and strategized and in place before you do any of your advertising or marketing later. So we hope that this episode's been useful and you've enjoyed, maybe you've got some ideas off of it and you'd be willing to reach out and talk to this guy right here. It's below me.
Somebody.
Yeah. For me, John, talk to John. Or you can talk to his boss, Mitch.
It's the next episode.
Nobody's boss.
It's not the
Yes, you are.
But, we'd love to have a conversation with you guys. John, is there anything you want to plug?
Other than, going into 2021, and obviously 2020 has been rough. But I know a lot of folks are finalizing budgets and trying to strategize and figure out what they're going to do next year to stand out and probably make up for what happened this year. Let's chat. Let's figure it out.
Yep. You can go to NerdBrandAgency.com, and there's all kinds of ways to get in touch with us, especially that contact link and the navigation is really good. And we'd love to chat with you, or you can find us on Facebook. We're on YouTube. If you want, you can go to nerdbrandagency.com/podcast. I'll be including a video of this show, as well as a link to YouTube for you to subscribe to that. We would love for you to like and subscribe to this video. And if you want to get new notifications about another show, please click the bell icon. And everybody, thanks for listening. And remember, keep your nerd brand strong.